Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kicks and Picks podcast. Coach Steve here. We have Nick back with us. Scotty is here as well. He no longer has the burning room. Anfield is back, doing well after last weekend. Scott, I got to start with you because your boys, they screwed me, and you got to be feeling pretty good about that.
Yeah, it was a pleasant surprise. I think we've learned one thing about Liverpool this season, and that's they play better with 10 men on the pitch than 11. I think they are up 3-0 when they're 10 men on the pitch, and I think it's something like 2-2 or 2-1 when they have all 11 guys on the field. So might be a strategy for Klopp moving forward. Let's just keep more space open, take a guy off. Don't have to wait for a red card and lose him for the next match. But it was certainly a nice twist. I'm happy to see my boy Darwin Nunez succeeding. I've been bummed that he hasn't been starting this season. I get that they've been trying to experiment more with Gakpo and Jota. That's like a false nine, but I mean, when you're spending 100 million euros on a striker, you got to play him. I don't care. You have to play him. He didn't set the world on fire last year, but he wasn't, bad by any means. And he's starting to show that he's putting the, finishing touch together now, scoring goals. And, he's got 2 goals in the season, and I think something like 33 minutes played. Give him a start.
I was going to argue that sometimes they have 9 men on the field because Gakpo has been
he's been
terrible.
Bad. We said that in our preview, and I know we asked Andrew the question, what do you think about Gakpo? Because I've been lukewarm on him at best, and I don't think it's his fault. I just don't think Gakpo is a false 9 midfielder. I think he's a winger. I think he plays best when he's out in the left wing. But we have Luis Diaz out there, who's probably been Liverpool's player of the season so far. So what are you going to do?
He just seems like the odd man out in terms of talent. Forget about position. I mean, positionally, it's tough when you have so many good players to fill only so many roles, but he's the odd man out because he's the worst player, I think, out of all the options. Just my opinion.
And
I don't
I
see
think
him
he would be great as an
out.
impact sub, though. Like, bring him in, right? Like when Luis Diaz is running around the pitch for 70 minutes, take him off, bring on Gakpo. Gakpo can, have a little bit more possession-based game. It's not going to be as, pacey and direct, but I think he's a good option off the bench. Yeah. So I hope Nunez gets to start, this weekend against Villa. We'll see. I feel like Klopp is going to kind of hold on to this false 9 thing until at least the international break, but the guy's earned it at this point.
Yeah, I guess I have to take fault for my Tottenham loss because as soon as I turned the match on, I was feeling pretty good. I turned it on, midway through the second half or so, and as soon as I turned it on is when Nunez scored the first time and then scored the second time. Rough loss for me, rough loss for the pod as we finished 4-6 on the weekend. Down exactly 2 units somehow with the numbers that we hit. So not ideal for us, but the pod lock did keep locking again. Yes, Barcelona came through. Scary times there, but they ended up coming through with the 4-3 victory. Another one that really made us sweat because they're up 2-0 in the first half and blew that lead. But we have to bounce back this week, right? I mean, I guess before we move on to this week, let's just talk about some things we noticed last weekend. I'll start with Serie A. I just have to say, Serie A looking a lot like last season in terms of teams dropping results, right? Teams that shouldn't be losing matches or dropping 2 points in a draw. You go through Atalanta, started the weekend losing at home to Frosinone 2-1. Shocker, right? I think Nick and I both agreed that Frosinone is probably the worst team in the league on paper. Should be relegated, and they lost that match. Roma lost 2-1 at Hellas. A bit of a surprise there. Fiorentina blew a 2-0 lead at home to Lecce and drew. And Lazio losing 1-0 at home to Genoa. Matteo Retegui, the Italianized Argentine, right? First
could have had 3 goals.
First match against your boys, and he scored. Really just Inter. Oh, I almost forgot. Juventus 1-1 against Bologna, right? They had to come back and get the result there. So of the top 8 teams on paper, 5 dropped points. Napoli, Inter, and Milan remained perfect. Nick, what stood out to you in Serie A last weekend?
So we didn't do an official Serie A preview on the podcast this year, but I did go on with our good friend Martino. Went for about an hour together in depth, and anybody could check that out on his Twitter, on our Twitter, if you haven't. I think one of the things that we had said, and I know the 3 of us have talked about it offline, we haven't said it on the air, but one of the things that we've said seems to be very, very true through 2 weeks, and that's Napoli, Inter, Milan are the class of the league. Everybody else is fighting for 4th place or worse. And based on the results Coach Steve just read off, that is 100% true. These are, the other teams are dropping points against relegation teams, against bottom 10 teams. You can't have that because the Napolis and Inters of the world certainly aren't going to make those mistakes. Milan is off to a flying start. I think they're not the biggest surprise, but they're definitely, I didn't think that their offense would gel this good this quickly.
That's the word, the gel, right? I didn't think they'd gel so fast.
So that's been definitely a bright spot. They're fun to watch. I think we'll certainly get into our picks. If you're watching on YouTube, you see who I'm a believer in this week. I think Inter, I will reiterate, I think it's tough to go against the defending champs, and Napoli are a great side, but my thoughts there, and Scotty, I know is a believer in this as well. They're going to be greatly impacted by the Cup of Nations this year. Osimhen, we don't know how much time he's going to miss. He's going to miss at least a month planned, probably more than that because people come back injured. So I think that's a knock on Napoli. They need to stack as many goals and as many points as they can early on, which they seem to be doing. But Inter, to me, has the deepest team in the league. I mean, they cruised to a 2-0 victory this past week. They were up 2 goals relatively early, and I don't think they were neutral from there on out. They never got worried. So I think that's going to be a theme for that team all season. They're going to try to do well in all 3 cups, and they have to imagine they could win the league. They have to have that belief, I think, after last year.
Yeah, I think all 3 of those teams definitely have to have the belief. Napoli, Inter, and Milan at least after the first 2 weeks, right? On paper, they all seem to be the strongest trio, and I think on the pitch they've proved it so far. And like you said, they have the rosters to do it. Scotty, we'll jump to the Premier League for you. Premier League, some surprise results too. West Ham beating Brighton 3-1, definitely unexpected at Brighton. That not one we expected to see. We talked about the Liverpool Newcastle result. Newcastle up a goal at home. Definitely a surprise there. I mean, City, they had their hands full with Sheffield for quite a while. Yeah. Arsenal dropped points to Fulham. Villa's been hot. United had a tough time with Nottingham Forest. Chelsea really kind of cruised against Luton Town, which we expected. Tottenham continues to impress so far the first couple weeks of the season. What stood out to you last weekend? Oh, and we guess we have to throw in that Everton hasn't scored a goal in 3 weeks. Your bitter rivals there.
Yeah, I think the theme so far in the Premier League this season is that there's no clear team that is the class of the league right now. City, as you mentioned, they're sitting there at 9 points through 3 matches. Can't really ask much more from them, but they certainly haven't looked great. And with the injury to De Bruyne, I certainly think they're more vulnerable this season than they probably have been in years past. Haaland is going to be a little bit isolated. We saw him getting frustrated in the first half against Sheffield United, not getting the service he's used to. Grealish and Foden are going to have to step up in that regard, and maybe even to an extent Alvarez. So we'll see how they kind of, round out their roster going into the first half of this season now. Arsenal, who we all kind of have pegged as being potential repeat title contenders, have looked shaky, dropped points to Fulham this weekend. I think the offense isn't quite clicking as well as it was last season. They certainly don't seem to have the same mentality where they just come out. Remember, I think I made a ton of money last season taking Arsenal first half money line because they would come out and they'd score, 2 or 3 goals within the first 30 minutes in regular cadence. And that hasn't been happening this season. And then Newcastle, who I think was kind of a question mark, right? They're going to have to deal with Europe all season long. They haven't looked great to start the season. Granted, I think they probably had the hardest schedule to start the season, getting both Liverpool and City in their first 3 matches, but nothing to really write home about aside from maybe Alexander Isak's play. So there's not been a real runaway front runner in the Premier League, which is good for the competition and the appeal of the league. But I think there is some clear cellar dwellers to start the season. Everton, certainly one of them. Lots of concern on the other side of the Mersey. Have yet to score a goal, as Coach mentioned. Really potentially dire stuff. I mean, if you're a patron and you've been reading our power rankings, I've been writing about how Everton's scheduled to start the season before this international break at the end of September is about as soft as it's going to get. And then after that international break, when you get into October through the holiday period, they play 12 of their matches. 8 of them are against teams that are projected to finish in the top half of the table. So it does not get any easier for them. And if they're not taking advantage of the softness of the schedule now, it could be a very long season for them because it'll certainly be another season where they're constantly being talked about as potential relegation candidates. And then aside from them, I think, Luton Town, they're a good story. We talk about their stadium and kind of have, some jokes at that the stadium's expense, but Kenilworth Road still not quite up to Premier League standards. They had to, miss their first home game against Burnley, which really would have been an opportunity for them to get points. But as such, they've had to open the season with 2 away games. And they haven't looked good. They've lost both games by 3+ goals. I think they're prime candidates to go back down. I think the management is kind of expecting that because you see them not investing a whole lot in newcomers, kind of like Forest did last year. They went out and spent 150 million pounds on transfers just to try to stay up. So I think Luton Town are probably taking the long-term approach here, maybe not going to invest as much in new players and hope that they can come back up with a little bit more sturdy financial standing.
Yeah. So definitely a lot to talk about there. Go ahead, Nick.
No, I was just going to say Arsenal. It's funny. You said they've struggled. We know Jesus has been hurt. If only they had a forward that could play that, top number 9 role that was just sitting there.
I don't think Nkite has been bad. I know you're talking about USA National. You're talking about Balogun.
Yeah.
I think they're trying to move him. I
think
think
they are. But, I mean, don't you think that's the one thing that's looked a little bit off for them so far this year?
I don't know. I think the midfield hasn't quite hit its stride. I think Saka's been okay. He's been pretty good, but he hasn't been, last season, I think he was great. And Martinelli was the guy that everyone's kind of flagged as being a guy to make the jump. And, he's been good, not great as well. So I don't necessarily think that Balogun would be the difference between them sitting at 9 points and 7, but I think it's just they haven't quite clicked yet this season for whatever reason. Maybe it's a little bit of a slow start. But once they get up and running, I expect them to kind of hit that mid-season stride, and hopefully for Gunners fans that they could kind of recreate some of that magic they had last season where they were banging in goals left and right, especially early in the first half. That usually takes, it forces the opponent to play out more, and that opens up to more goal scoring opportunities.
Yeah, Balogun was, as far as I know, in Monaco today for his medicals. So he is no longer in the picture there. Interesting that he never really got a chance, like Nick said, considering the injury to Gabby Jesus. Maybe he could have helped out. And Nketiah did score last week, though. So, and like you said, Scott, no clear front runner in terms of like domination so far, but City 3 wins in 3 has to be a concern for the other teams that have dropped points so far. It has to be.
Yeah, their big win though really is Newcastle, right? They got Burnley and Luton Town to start the season. So in both of those games, I think we're at home. Or not Luton Town side. They got Burnley and Sheffield United, the other promoted club. So I don't know. They haven't really played anybody tough besides Newcastle, and they squeaked that one out. Yeah. So we'll see. TBD on City. I think they're more vulnerable this season than they have been in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, and there could be some of that winter hangover too, right? You finally won the Champions League. You are a little, maybe slightly less driven because you've kind of won everything now. It's natural. It's human nature a little bit. So we'll see if that has an effect too as the season wears on. And
if Rodri goes down, I think they're in big trouble.
Yeah,
because their midfield is already kind of short, and Rodri has certainly been holding things together. And Kovacic will be fine, but he's not. We saw him at Chelsea. He's not a guy that's going to anchor a midfield.
Right.
So they got to hope that Rodri has a very healthy season and is, aptly rotated by Pep throughout the season.
And I ask this, like, scared to find out the answer, but like, how much better can Haaland be? I mean, I feel like I ask this week in and week out, right? Exceptional. I mean, I think it's within the realm of possibility. He repeats, comes close to what he did last year, maybe does a little bit better, but how much more is that improving this team? Because they've already gotten that from him, right? Like, what's he going to do? Score 40? I don't know.
Yeah. And the problem is, like, he is one of those strikers that is reliant on service coming into him. He doesn't create, for himself. We've seen games where he gets, 3 or 4 touches in the first half, but is completely isolated. And, without De Bruyne kind of being there to unlock things and open things up from distance, we kind of saw with Sheffield United, they kind of keyed in on him. They're being physical with him. They're getting him off his game. He was getting visibly frustrated, and, he is young. People forget that. Like, he is great, but he's also very young. There's certain levels of maturity that comes with that, which he doesn't quite have yet. And I'm sure he'll develop over the course of his career, but he'll be susceptible to having, off nights. And that's going to cost City because there's nobody else to pick him up right now.
Yeah, for sure. So looking ahead to this week in the Premier League, since we're in England right now, let's stick to it. Couple matches jump out at me. One of them being Brighton Newcastle. I think that's going to be a big match for those two sides. I think especially for Newcastle, having dropped 2 matches already to top 6 or top 4 rivals, depending on how high they can shoot this season. Arsenal, Man U jumps out at me. Also, your Liverpool, Aston Villa.
It's a great Sunday slate.
Yeah, what are you guys looking for this weekend?
Yeah, I think the Sunday slate, it's our last in America here. We have our last Sunday before football, American football starts up. And I think this is as good of an appetizer as you're going to get. You're getting, Liverpool, Aston Villa. Aston Villa was one of the hottest teams just to end the season. Last season, they had a bad opening match against Brighton, or Villa, excuse me, against Newcastle. And then since then, they've been, scoring goals at will. I think they've scored 13 goals in their last 3 matches, including their Conference League qualifier midweek. So I think that will be a very entertaining game. I think there's going to be goals aplenty to start things off at the 9 a.m. Eastern time slot. And then you have Arsenal United, which is an old school rivalry. I think it's, 2 teams. United probably need this more than Arsenal right now. But if Arsenal want to be considered title contenders this year, this is the type of match at home that you would expect them to win. United's kind of got some concerns going on. We didn't touch about it too much last week. They did escape Forest, that match barely with 3 points, but had they dropped, points in that one, they'd be sitting, in the bottom half of the table, probably in line with, the Fulhams and the Crystal Palaces of the world, on par with Chelsea. That's where they are. And they've been getting enough slack as well. So I think United, if they drop all 3 here, then there'll be some more discontent. That fan base loves to speak up about it. For Arsenal, like I said, I think they need to have this if they really want to be considered title contenders. If they're dropping points at home to this kind of slow started United side, it's what happened to Liverpool, right? Liverpool last season took this slow started United side and got walloped by them. And then United's season took off and Liverpool's kind of tanked. So it's going to be a big one. It'll certainly be entertaining either way.
Yeah. I don't have plays in any of these games yet, but Newcastle and Brighton is a toss up, right? Brighton's plus 155, Newcastle's plus 160. I think it's a must win for Newcastle. I really do. I mean, like you said, 2 losses out of 3.
Especially the way they lost last weekend.
Just
too,
a brutal schedule,
more, right?
Yeah. So it's not an easy game. They're away from home, but they really need this one. I'm not looking at the draw no bet or the spread or anything like that, but I have to imagine that they're definitely a playable side in that bet. I'm guessing the draw no bet's probably around minus 110, minus 120, somewhere in that realm. So I would definitely look to that. At least that's how I feel today. And kind of, I feel the same way with Arsenal. I agree with Scott that Man United need the win a lot more, but Arsenal at home, they're minus 125. I think that's a really, really playable number on the money line. I mean, there's always a fear of the draw in this one, plus 295 if you're feeling that. But United are a pretty big betting underdog. So if you believe in United, you can get a great number on them. But I think Arsenal at minus 125 is probably the way to go.
Yeah, and I think those 2 sides have to be the 2 sides that came into the season with the biggest ambitions in terms of challenging City after last season, right? United came on in the second half when Ten Hag kind of started to put his stamp on the team. Arsenal was there with them for 85% of the season until they lost the second time to City. So definitely, if you want to hang with City, who's hosting Fulham this week and could very well be on 12 points after this, you got to keep pace to some extent, right? And City at some point will have to play some of the better teams. They have played Newcastle, we said, but they did play 2 newly promoted sides. But you're gonna have to keep pace as best you can, and draws in these matches only favor a team like City in the standings. Really, if it does go that route.
No, I mean, now the more you're saying it, the more we're talking about it. Like, I feel like if Newcastle lose this game, if they drop 3 points, like, I don't know, man. You're struggling to repeat top 4. I really believe that.
Tough sledding after that, yeah.
Unless you're just absolutely taking care of every team in the bottom half of the table, which they might. No. But, they went on that magical run a couple years ago when we started making money with them. They're certainly capable. And you mentioned Isak. I mean, he's been like a new signing, right? He's been awesome so far. Just the way they even play off of him, whether he's scoring goals or not. But I think they desperately need 3 points in this game. I think that's the most critical 3 points up for grabs this weekend.
Yeah, and then like our friend Baz said, when we had him on for the state of the club, their depth isn't really that great. And so when they get into the part of the season where now that they're in Champions League and they're competing for maybe a trophy with FA Cup or the EFL Cup, they're going to start to run into problems with their depth. They're not going to be as fresh. So dropping points early in the season, even though it's not been a super easy schedule, right? Probably the hardest schedule of anybody in the league. It still kind of sucks because, it's not going to get that much better when you are playing lower sides, but you're going to be playing on, 3 days rest.
Yeah, for sure. So let's move on to Serie A. There are some other big head-to-heads there too that we need to talk about quickly before we move into our picks. 3 big ones in Serie A out of the top 8 teams that are fighting probably for, the European spots when all said and done. We have Friday, Roma hosting Milan. We have Saturday, Napoli hosting Lazio, and Sunday, Inter hosting Fiorentina. Nick, what jumps out at you in those three?
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, all three of us have a play in the Roma Milan game, so I'll save my thoughts there. I think Napoli Lazio, it's two teams trending in completely opposite directions. Lazio has been worse than anybody could have imagined. But for me, as a fan of the team, it's really frustrating to see the mentality of this team. Forget about the talent, right? I think they're largely the same team as they were last year. You did lose Milinkovic-Savic, which is near impossible to overcome, but they did buy very smartly. Problem is, none of these new players have had time to train under Sarri. They haven't made any impact whatsoever, and they lost to two relegation teams. Absolutely unacceptable. And now they have Napoli and Juve coming up back to back. So my issue with it is that this team is never motivated. Sarri did not have them ready to play week 1 or week 2. I don't give a shit who's on the field. You got to be better than that. They haven't been. And quite honestly, for the 2.5 years that he's been in charge, this team doesn't have the will to come from behind and win a game or snatch points. If they're down by like the 70th minute, 3 points is out of the question. It hasn't happened. It won't happen. We saw that the first 2 weeks. Really, really rough. And Napoli look like the defending champions that they are. Osimhen's off to a 3-goal start through 2 games. Kvara is now back healthy. Rudy Garcia has new players in the lineup. They just got rid of Lozano, who's terrible. We've bashed him for 3 years on the podcast. Raspadori and Simeone look good. I mean, Napoli's a -175 favorite. They absolutely should be. I don't see any other way that this game goes. And I think Fiorentina, Inter should win that game. Fiorentina is another team that hasn't looked very good. They've scored goals, but their defense has been suspect. They've given up goals in both games. Even the one where they smashed Genoa, they gave up goals in that one. So they're going to struggle to score consistently. Same old Fiorentina.
Fiorentina got their Conference League qualifier on Thursday too, so
there
they're
you go. Short turnaround. And they're down. They're down 1-0. Yeah. So Inter at home, you have to like them in this game.
Before we get into our picks, let me play a quick over-under game with you guys. So home teams in those 3 matches are Roma, Napoli, Inter. Over under 1.5 home team wins out of those 3 wins. Over. Okay.
Easy over.
I will take the under. Just the way that things in Serie A have been going. I think there'll be some upsets. I mean, maybe Milan over Roma isn't exactly an upset, but Lazio did it last year, right? Lazio's beat Napoli. That was their
and that's
banner
the thing.
that they hung in the stadium this summer.
All the big teams. This is the same problem they've had for 3 years. They beat every team that's good. They can't beat the relegation teams.
And I think the thing for Lazio too, Nick, the problem with it's similar to Newcastle in the sense that they kind of overachieved because other teams struggled and they got into the top 4. But their depth is going to be an issue when Champions League starts up. And if you start and you don't win either of these 2 matches the next 2 weeks against Napoli and Juve, you're on 0 points through 4, and then Champions League starts kicking off. Like, you're going to start to struggle more against these mid to lower table clubs when your depth is tested more.
You need to get 3 points out of these 2 matches, at least 3 points minimum. I mean, you have to win a game. I don't know.
All right, we'll check back in next weekend. I'll take the under. I say 2 of these away teams will get points.
And just one other match in Europe I want to point out, not in one of the 2 leagues we generally cover, but it is my boys Union Berlin hosting RB Leipzig. That is a big one in the Bundesliga.
Dude, Leipzig looked good.
But so did Berlin. They scored, I think, 3 down a man the other day. And they didn't leave me with any regrets. I took it last week when you weren't here. I said to Scotty, my biggest regret from match week 1 in Bundesliga was not taking Berlin. They had a good number on them, and I didn't take it. And then I went back to them last week, and they cashed. That was one of our few nice results last weekend. So that's one to keep an eye on in the Bundesliga. And there's really big numbers on both those teams if you like either of them money line.
And one thing I do want to say, as we bet it more and cover it a little more, goals have not been coming as easily in Germany as they typically do early on in the season. It's just something to keep an eye on. Lines have been set at 3.5. I've been looking at them pretty religiously for overs, and they haven't really been coming due. So just an interesting reversal. Whereas like Spain is the opposite, right? Spain you would struggle to get 1 goal in a lot of these games, and every game seems to have 2, 3, 4 goals. We're not a month into the season, but just interesting.
All right, so I think we'll head over to our picks for this week. We also have a big guest coming up after our picks, so stick around for that. So, Scotty, why don't you kick off our locks of the week for match week 4 in the Premier League and match week 3 in Serie A?
Yeah, I'll start by saying Coach snaked Tottenham for me. I am 2-1 this season when taking Tottenham, and I am 0-6 when taking anybody else. So, Coach, you did me dirty. We'll see if we can get a winner somewhere else. My first one, I'm going to take Aston Villa double chance or plus half a goal, whichever gives you better juice at Liverpool. Plus half a goal I'm seeing is plus 125. So that's the one I'm going to be taking. Like I just said, Aston Villa are probably the hottest team right now in terms of goal scoring, 13 goals in their last 3 matches. And for Liverpool, they're already down to their 3rd and 4th choice center backs. Konate is hurt. Van Dijk picked up a red card against Newcastle, so he'll be suspended for this one. So at best, you're looking at a pairing of Matip and Gomez. Matip, we know, has been injured frequently throughout his career at Liverpool, so I'd expected to see him get rotated like he was at Newcastle. So that means you'll see Kwanzaa coming in, I think he's 17-year-old center half for Liverpool. So I think Aston Villa will probably be getting goals in this one. And like I said, unless I see Klopp actually put Nunez into the starting lineup, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think you'll still see Gakpo starting as that false 9. And I think it'll be a struggle for Liverpool. If Aston Villa come out and play, fearless, I think they'll get goals. And really the only way that I see Liverpool getting all 3 points from this one is in like a 3-2 type shootout where Liverpool managed to just outscore Villa. If you're afraid of Liverpool in this one, Aston Villa team total over 1.5 is plus 150. As I mentioned, they're scoring at will. Liverpool's defense is hurt. Their midfield is still kind of getting figured out with the newcomers that they've brought in. So I think that could also be a decent shout.
Liverpool to concede first, a Scotty favorite.
Always. You do that too.
Coach, this is week 4 of the season, week 4 of picks. Has Scotty faded Liverpool all 4 weeks, or do I have that wrong?
Only two. I didn't fade him to start the season.
It's funny he's fading him after their big win last week.
Coach faded him last week. It wasn't me. I didn't take.
It was me. It was me.
That was
Coach.
Oh, I had their team total week 1, and they fucking screwed me. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just putting us all together in one big blob.
All right. Yeah.
All right. So I'm starting the Premier League with West Ham. This is a Friday match. Something you might want to lock in early because they're minus 125 at Luton Town right now. I was shocked to see them at minus 125. I was shocked. I really couldn't believe it when I saw it. That's why I jumped on it right away. After being held to a late draw by Bournemouth in the first weekend of the season, the Hammers have rolled to matching 3-1 victories against Chelsea and Brighton. Brighton was a big surprise for me. Luton should have a little bounce in their first home match in the Premier League, but it won't be enough against an informed West Ham side, in my opinion. I love this number, and I would take it every time.
Yeah, Coach beat me to this pick by, I want to say 45 seconds. First thing that stood out to me, thing we have to like about West Ham is all 3 of their guys are showing up so far, right? Antonio, Ward-Prowse, and Ali.
Bowen.
Oh, Bowen. I'm sorry.
Ali is Villa. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I got West Ham 3rd in my power rankings this week, 2nd best team in London behind Tottenham. So that's all you need to know.
Yeah, I like that pick as well. So I'm going to stick with Serie A. Tried to rant a little bit, but I got to start with Napoli-Lazio game 1 over 2.5. It's at minus 120. And I think that's really what swayed me. This number has been minus 170 or worse the last 3 or 4 matchups between these teams. I know because we cover it every time it comes up. Lazio couldn't stop the 3 of us right now, right? Their midfielders have struggled to adapt. I kind of mentioned that. And I think Napoli's flying. So I would be really shocked if Napoli do not get at least 2 goals in this game. I think this is easy money, and it is a hashtag easy over.
Love a good easy over this time of year. All right. I will go to my second lock of the week. It's going to be a little bit of a change of pace here. We're going with Everton at Sheffield United. I'm taking the draw line at plus 220. They've actually been 29 Premier League matches so far this season, and yet only 5 draws. We had 2 last week, 0 in week 2, and 3 in week 1. I think it's a weird stat. I have not looked up what the average number of draws is through 3 weeks in the season, but it feels like this is a very low number. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that's the case. But given that, if there was a match where you would expect there to be a draw, it would be a match against 2 teams that are battling for every point that they can get and can't score goals. And that's exactly what you have with Everton and Sheffield United here. So I think this is maybe a game that's either 0-0, or if somebody does get on the score sheet, they probably try to protect that lead while the other team tries to go all out. We've seen all the extra minutes and stoppage time usually kind of pay off for the team that attacks in these kind of situations. So I'll go ahead and take the draw line here at plus 220. I think that's a really good number.
All right, I'm going to my next pick is the one that Scotty was has some gripes about, and it's Tottenham money line -115 at Burnley. A lot of people, including myself, wrote off Spurs this summer. However, after clawing back to a 2-2 draw against Brentford when they were down 2-1 to open the season, they've managed identical 2-0 wins over United and Bournemouth. Burnley's lost 2 home matches to City and Villa to open the season. I like Spurs to stay hot, and don't envy Burnley's opening schedule with the Luton Town one being postponed because of the scheduling issue. So I like Spurs to stay hot. Love the number at -115 on the money line, and I think they're playing some good ball right now.
Yeah, this is the case where the books are undervaluing a team and they haven't quite caught on yet, right? It happened with us in Newcastle, a year and a half ago, coming out of that January transfer window. I think it's happening now with Tottenham. They are playing a lot better than what books are expecting to, and at some point in the next 2 or 3 weeks they'll adjust. But until then, you're getting really good value on a good team.
And it's so interesting because they adjusted quickly with Chelsea, or maybe they're overvaluing Chelsea, but they haven't caught up with Tottenham. So let's ride it.
Yeah, that's what it is. You got to ride these teams while they undervalue them.
Absolutely.
I would if you didn't steal them from me.
I have to go back to a bet that is like the foundation of this podcast. You mentioned it, Coach. We had a rough week last week. We had 1 and 2 weeks across the board for the three of us. So the way that we get out of this slump is to go back to corner kicks. And to do that, we take the best team on the planet, at least in Italy, for corners. That is Inter. Team total corners over 5.5. It is plus money, +105. Corners are back. They had 8 corners in their first game, 7 in their second. I was really tempted to take over 9.5 for the game, but Fiorentina don't really get corners, or at least they haven't very well. They're going to be on that short rest, as you spoke about, Coach. So, do I bank on them to get 4? I don't think we can do that here. So I think Inter getting to 6 at plus money is the play. Corner kicks and picks back.
That's it. Nick's bringing the corners back.
Have to.
Also back will be Nick's Twitter videos of clearly deflected shots going out for corners, but getting called goal kicks. So
yeah,
look out for that on Twitter.
You have to admit, though, I don't have the exact stats on this, but that has to be, we've averaged one of those a game, right? At least
Easily.
One missed corner call a game on a game that we bet corners.
I would say probably closer to 2.
Yes. So stay tuned.
All right. So now we will go to all of our third picks, which will all feature Milan and Roma. I'm going to start off with Milan first half money line at Roma. My thought process is this: Roma has looked bad this season. Like, they stink, and they're so bad that they're actually talking themselves into Lukaku being a great signing and a great deal for them, even though it's a loan and they're only paying 5
I think
million
like 1 million people showed up to the airport today or something.
Yeah. It's just that's when a team is desperate. So I'm going to go ahead and take Milan first half money line. I mean, Roma's defense has also been just as bad, or a reason why they're so bad. They've conceded multiple goals to such offensive juggernauts as Salernitana and Hellas Verona. I think Milan have a little bit more offensive firepower that they can offer than both of those sides. So I expect Milan to come out, especially being away. Nothing really to lose here. Come out on the front foot, try and get a goal or 2. I could see this being a quick, easy match for Milan. And the first half money line here at plus 240 is massive. So I'll take that. Maybe Roma's play here is they try to like hang in there, even if they're down 1-0 in first half, try and sneak a goal in a draw. But the first half money line to me is a very juicy number.
All right. Like Scott said, we're all going in this match for this one. I'm going Roma versus Milan. Both teams to score at -115. Roma's defense has been far from lopsided, like Scotty mentioned, and both of their matches have seen them concede twice. Now, granted, the first one, it took some Kandreva magic, but they still conceded twice. But the attack has looked fairly dangerous, and their XG was better than what they actually put into the back of the net those 2 matches, which gives me some hope that they'll find the back of the net again here. They've been able to do that so far. Milan's attack's been clicking. I expect them to score at least 1, if not more. I really did think about going over 2.5 at plus 125, because that's not a number you usually get with these 2 teams playing each other, especially the way Roma played defense the last 2 years under Mourinho. But that could be worth a play too. But I could see this being a 1-1, like Scotty said. So I'm taking the both teams to score and playing it that way.
2 things I want to say. They got rid of Ibanez and got worse defensively. And Chris Smalling has looked awful.
Looks like Chris Smalling.
Yeah, no, I put out a tweet last week like he's in peak Man United form. Like, he looks fucking terrible. That dude has gotten burned for just about every goal. Yeah. So that is why I am also going with Milan in this one. I'm taking them full time. I'm taking them draw no bet, -110. This is just way too good of a number to pass up. Kind of like the one Scotty got. I think, Roma's at home, and that's the only reason that it's even like this. But, listen, have not looked fluid through 2 games. This is a number that I would take on a surging Milan squad 100 out of 100 times. Draw no bet, -110.
Out of principle, I'll probably have to fade that and go like Roma draw no bet because I like to lose money and I'm like too loyal to my club, and it'll probably make you win. So if you win
I
next
appreciate
week,
it.
thank me on the show.
Hey, I will. You got it.
All right, Nick, give us our pod lock of the week.
I don't want to give it, but I will. We're going to a team now. The pod lock is 3-0, game of the week. We have to go with the team that where the numbers tell us to go. It's Monaco. They burned us last week. Absolutely bad beat of the season. It's only been a few weeks, but it's a team that put 27 shots. I think 11 shots on target. They wound up with a 3-3 draw, had them on the money line against Nantes. Nantes had 3 shots and 3 goals. It was just absolutely brutal all the way around. Monaco's been rolling. They've scored 3+ goals in all 3 of their games. Lens has given up 7 goals in their 3 games so far. We are going with the team total so that they cannot hurt us at the end of 90. Over 1.5 goals, -125, Monaco, game of the week.
Yeah. The numbers say, right? And when
and they're at home.
I said, you asked what the line was and I said -125. We just couldn't believe it, right?
Yeah. So expect them to continue.
All right, so that'll wrap our picks. If you're watching on YouTube, thanks for watching. If you're listening on the pod, we have our interview coming up next with Wayne Girard. We're talking all things Roma. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can catch that as a separate video as well on our YouTube page. So thanks again for watching and listening. And here's to a 10-0 weekend.
All right, we are going to continue our State of the Club series. We have a very special guest with us, Wayne Girard. You guys know him on Twitter and on YouTube at Wayne in Rome. This man has been around the block. You have seen his work absolutely everywhere, from AS Roma themselves, Gentlemen Ultra, Football Italia, IFTV. Wayne, thank you so much for joining us. How are you feeling, man?
Feeling great. Hell of an intro. Thank you very much.
Hey.
I'm excited. I always want to talk culture. So let's do the business.
Yeah, 1 point through 2 matches. You're excited. I can't say that I feel the same way about my team, but we'll get into it. Let's jump right in then. So last season, maybe a little bit of a disappointment. I'd love to get your general assessment on how Roma did. 6th place in Serie A, did make it to that Europa League final, lost on penalties, unfortunately. Give us your high level thoughts.
Yeah, I think that the thing which really bothered me about that was the Juventus point deduction, because Mourinho goes out and says something really which needed to be said, was that when you have a certain team in the table and they're lower or they're more, you adapt your team, your starting 11, and it reflects that. If you know you've got pushing, you're going to go with players who don't play as much, who are not as experienced or not as good. And when you know it's tighter, well, then you put out a different lineup. So the way that things went back and forth seriously affected Roma. On top of that, they ran out of gas. Like, the team is so affected by financial fair play that they can't get really that type of depth to go forwards in not just 1, but 2 or 3 competitions. So to me, it wasn't so much about the play, because at the time, sometimes the play looked really good. But at other times, it just looked like they were getting exhausted. And when Mourinho can't put out his starting lineup, I think the dominoes began to fall. I don't take blame entirely away from the manager at some points. There always has to be a share of the pie. But I think that so much was about external forces affecting the club.
Yeah, I think Wayne hit the nail on the head there with the depth, the lack of depth. Roma couldn't do it on 2 fronts. And I you can tell me if you agree, Wayne, but I think Mourinho made the right choice going for the Europa League in the end, because I think with the way that team played last season, I think they were more built for tournament football, knockout football, and they came within penalty kicks, right? And when they got to penalty kicks, you saw who was shooting, and you didn't have that great of a feeling about it. But I think he had to make that choice, and because of depth and injuries and everything else, and I think if he had to do that over, I would agree with him to do the same thing.
Yeah, definitely tournament style, built to play that way. And when that penalty kick is not given, man, it just seems like it's more than bad luck at times.
I think that's fair. I think we would all maybe agree on some of these guys. I'm thinking about Tammy Abraham. I'm thinking about Belotti as, something of a disappointment last year. Who were the ones that stood out? Did somebody like Dybala measure up to the expectations Roma fans had for him? Is there anybody that were missing? Who really stood out for you? And was anybody more of a disappointment maybe than a Belotti or a Tammy Abraham?
I think a lot of those problems came from the midfield. That you look at Belotti and Tammy Abraham, and those are guys who do well with midfield that's based around build up rather than kick the ball up and hope for the best. Those aren't those types of strikers. Those are guys who need to be in the end of the final third between the center backs, playing off the shoulder of the two defenders, the second to last or the last defender, somewhere in that. So because the midfield was so rigid, it seriously affected Tammy or Belotti. Now, I'm not saying there aren't a few chances out there where the boys could have done better, but scoring is contagious. And when you are not set up in a way which is advantageous to you as a striker, it can go really bad. And unfortunately, it went bad for not just one, but two strikers last year. But I do think that's from the overall team build. And I think that Mkhitaryan was never replaced. And that was like, you can only be as strong as your weakest link. And that omission of Mkhitaryan to me spoke volumes, and it really showed last season.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think Mkhitaryan was a huge loss last season. They miss his, he's just a smart, intelligent player in the midfield. He opened up so much for other players. 2 years ago, you saw how well Pellegrini played with Mkhitaryan, right? And the season he had and kind of the downturn he had a little bit last season, some knocks and things like that took away from his form. But I agree with Wayne. I think Mickey was a huge loss. And I think we see a little difference. We'll get into this season, but Wayne, we saw with Belotti these first two matches, Roma controlled possession in those matches, and he got better chances, and he finished some of those chances where he didn't have to be just kind of like hoof it long to Belotti and hope for the best.
Yep, that's why he's succeeding now. And also, he's said it. He's like, I'm back to 100% now.
Yeah.
Whatever. A lot of times, if there's an injury, if there's something which is not below ground, but how do you say, like something that's just not being highlighted, something that's not public in the news. There are players go through certain things, whether it's mental or physical, or it's a hairline stress fracture like Iturbe used to have. And it's like, this guy stinks. Well, there was more to it. So, but him being 100% and then scoring 3 goals in the first game of the season, to me, that says a lot.
And just one guy that Steve, you touched on him, but Wayne, I want to get your thoughts on Pellegrini because, I watch this guy, he's got all the talent in the world, game in and game out. It seems like he's everywhere. He's always on or around the ball, but the results just haven't been there for him in terms of goal scoring, in terms of assists. What do you make of Pellegrini?
I think last season, I think he had a bit of trouble fitting in with Dybala at times. I think he was, 2 seasons ago, he was the man on the ball a lot of the time in the midfield, the trequartista. He was the one linking with Tammy and with Zaniolo and whoever else was involved in the attack, Mkhitaryan. And I think last season he really did have trouble fitting in with Dybala. I think we saw that where Dybala dominates a lot of the ball. And I think Pellegrini did have some physical things that he tried to play through as the captain. And I think he does that a lot more than people realize. I mean, he ate a lot of minutes last year for this team. And then you saw him last week, his first match back after he's suspended in week 1, and he looked pretty good. I thought he had a pretty good match in a match where the team didn't play all that well. I mean, we see his set piece ability has grown tremendously in the past couple seasons. He hit a post on free kick. He set up Cristante, who headed one off the bar off of his corner kick. So I'm looking for him to rebound. I think he looks healthier too, and I think that'll make a big difference. But I think it is a little bit of him having to gel a little bit better with Dybala and kind of understanding that Dybala's going to drift a lot, right? And that's what Pellegrini was doing a couple seasons ago too. I think he was drifting a lot more. How do you see it, Wayne, from like a tactical perspective with those two?
It's strange to me because at times I've looked at Pellegrini and I've said, this guy is so much better as a box to box as an intermedio. And then other games, I'm like, he's not doing so great there. He looks a little lost. And then like maybe trequartista. And that to me is a bit more of a suitable role because when I watch him play with the national team, I see him play free and he wants to create and he wants to play 1-2s and burst forwards, into the final third. And that's him having fun. And I kind of miss that Pellegrini who goes out there and enjoys the game and who played at Sassuolo and did a heck of a job creating plays and just adding into the overall attack. And I miss that right now. I don't know if it's fatigue from last season carries off into this season, but he does look a little bit more invigorated. I thought his execution in Verona was poor, but I do think that there are special circumstances with that game, especially as Verona was allowed to play their game and sit back once the first goal happened. So I would like to see him again and watch him closely. I think that he's going to have a big game against Milan. I know that Dybala is doubtful, so he's not going to be playing 90 minutes. And like Steve, you mentioned, I want to see how he plays without Dybala versus when Dybala is on the pitch. That's something I really want to tactically pay attention to and just see his body language. How does he contribute in which phase, whether it's defensive or offensive more? So I think that's a subplot coming into Friday.
So given your outlook on the squad and your perspective on how they've performed, let's talk about the manager with Mourinho, a man that has, no shortage of opinions written about him on any given week. Are you guys happy with how he's been doing at Roma so far? Do you feel like he's been getting the most out of the squad? Or do you think he's been maybe, had a few missteps or has, made some decisions that maybe have cost Roma some points or some important matches here and there over the course of the last few seasons?
I am happy with Mourinho for what he's developed for the club mentally. I think that he has gotten a lot of character building in the works. I really see it. Roma for a period of time, I think for the majority of the season, was the team who scored the most goals from the 80th minute on. And I still see that never give up attitude instilled in them. He's no nonsense. And it's not just like he's out there barking. He's actually relatively quiet with his own players. It's not like he is this big, like Antonio Conte type of motivator. So I do think he gets as much out of them tactically. Sometimes it hurts as a fan. You want to see your boys go out there and play football and sling passes around and, make you smile by the way that they play sometimes. But with Mourinho, it's different because it's so thematic. It's, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get a low block. They're going to try to counterattack. Against Verona, they had to come out of their shell a little bit more. It didn't look completely natural. I wish there was more of a plan B, but the best managers in the world are not necessarily inventors, but they're guys, they're managers who have a set way that they play. That's what they built their bread and butter on. But even though you say that, like Ancelotti plays a certain way, Christmas tree formation, lets his best players play to their strengths. At the same time, Mourinho has played a couple different formations, and now I see a couple tweaks from the 3-4-2-1 to a 3-5-2, and I'm liking what I see so far. So tactically, last year, I wasn't the biggest fan. What I see now does seem like it fits the current crop of players the best. Steve?
Yeah, I agree. I think from the mental standpoint is where we've seen a huge difference with Roma in the way that they fight. They don't give up against smaller clubs when they're down. We even saw it last week against Verona. They were fighting to the end in that they were down 2-0 until pretty late in that match. And you're right. He doesn't really go after the players the way Conte does. He does it more in the media where he'll protect his players, I think. And some people might see what he's saying as excuses, but I think a lot of what he's saying is the truth when he's talking about the type of players Roma has not being good enough for top four, or, the depth isn't there to compete on two fronts or whatever. And he's very frank, I think, a lot of the time. And sometimes that's refreshing, I think. The tactics, you're right, that for 2 seasons, sometimes watching that sit back in the low block against like the Milans and Inters of the world. And you're just like, all right, can we try to do something here? Like we have Dybala on the team now. We have Tammy, who was coming off a really good season. Like, let's try to score some goals. And I guess in some ways that's him trying to just protect his defense and protect his midfield that wasn't very good last year by kind of just using numbers. And I think you're right. I think we've seen some more tactical flexibility, even though he hasn't been on the sidelines. He's involved some way in the ear of Bruno Conti. Like, there's no way Bruno Conti's managing the match. He's not with the club every day. And we have seen switches to the 4-man back line this season. We've seen some changes to the shape, and I think that's refreshing. I hope that against Milan, we don't come out Friday and just kind of sit back and wait and then not kind of go hit Milan until they've punched us in the mouth once or twice, which has happened in the past in some of these big matches. And that's hopefully what we're going to see more of this year, where there's that more flexibility. If we have to go 4-man back line, do it. Utilize some more of the midfielders when they're healthy, like the Renato Sanchez is that we brought in, and kind of be a little bit more aggressive, I think, going forward sometimes.
So the goodwill towards what he's been achieving on the pitch is still kind of offsetting some of the, maybe extracurricular struggles that comes with Mourinho. As you mentioned, Coach, he hasn't been on the sidelines yet this season because he's serving a sideline ban. That there's still no concerns right now with, some of the stuff that comes with Mourinho in terms of how he handles the media or interviews or even the refs.
I like it. It's not the PC thing to say, but I'm in favor of it. No one else sticks up for the club. The president of Rome doesn't speak. There's no press officer. I wish it were me. It's not. I live in Jersey City, regardless of the flag behind my head. But I think that he sees that there's a need, and he says it honestly. And sometimes the media doesn't know how to handle it. And I love the way that he goes back at them. And it's not necessarily it's not combative. He's just he just speaks truth, and he just drops facts, and people don't know what to do. And I love it. I love to see them squirm.
Yeah, I think just because the Friedkins are so quiet, like you said, they're behind the scenes owners, and Pinto doesn't say a whole lot. I think he's kind of taken on the face of the club role, where he's the one that is the mouthpiece for the club. And I think when there's refereeing issues, which we saw in the Europa League final, which could have cost them that final, right? Things like that, he's going to speak out. Maybe his behavior with the English ref, I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head, wasn't the best, but I'd have no problem with it. And the goodwill with the fans, I think, will last as long as Roma's doing what they're doing in Europe and competing, because you have to remember, before Roma won that Conference League, they hadn't won a trophy in a long time, over a decade, and they nearly won back-to-back European trophies, which pretty much no Italian clubs do anymore these days, right? Let alone a club like Roma, who has almost no European history in terms of winning.
So let's transition into some of the stuff that's going on in the summer, into this season. Busy transfer window for Roma. I think that, at least from what I can tell, maybe this is more than what you guys have been expecting, but a lot of players coming in, a lot of offensive help. You've got attacking midfield in Awar. You have Azmoun, the Iranian striker, and more recently in this week we've got Romelu Lukaku coming in on loan from Chelsea. Do you guys feel like a lot of the needs that Roma maybe were missing coming into the season have been addressed, or do you still think even with some of this transfer activity, there's still gaps that remain in the squad?
Yeah, I think that they have addressed many of the needs, right? Tammy Abraham getting hurt was killer. It was like 13 minutes at the end of the season last season that he blew out his ACL. The Roma ACL curse struck. It really, I think, affected their whole transfer plans. I think Tammy might have been the guy who was sold maybe along with Ibanez to kind of fund their summer. So it's been a lot of dealing with those FFP agreement regulations where they can't spend so much money. And Awar and Ndika were free signings. I think Ndika was brought in because they knew that Ibanez probably was the guy they would move this summer. We haven't seen him yet. Lorente was another loan deal. Christensen, a loan deal. Both guys from Leeds, a team that was relegated, looking to offload some salary. Awar, that free signing, to me, he looks very good so far. I think he's going to kind of take on the Mkhitaryan role that Wayne and I were talking about that they missed. He's looked very impressive so far. Renato Sanchez is another classic example of Roma taking a chance on a player who's coming off injury, very highly touted in the past, very talented player. Already missed a match, probably misses this week because of already a minor, muscle issue. But I think he's got a lot of talent, and if he can keep healthy, that fills a need in the midfield to push the ball through the midfield, which they haven't had last season. Paredes, I don't really rate that much, but I understand why he was brought in to kind of just fill the role in the deep lying midfield after Matic left unexpectedly. I was speaking with Nima Tavali today. He follows the Iranian national team closely. He had a lot of good things to say about Azmoun and Lukaku. I know you and Nick aren't so high on him. I know at 30, going on 31, he's not the same player he was when he was scoring.
Coach, don't say it's just me and Nick, because you are not high on him either. Don't be changing your tune just because he's coming.
No
to your
Roma
club.
fan was high on him until
don't
last
even
week.
even pretend that this is a me and Nick
That's my
thing.
stance on it.
When you look at it from a Roma perspective, even at 30 years old, if he's a 15-goal scorer, that's an upgrade for Roma after what they went through last year. And I think he offers a different dimension at striker in the matches that Mourinho wants to play a little bit more defensive and have a guy they can hoof the ball to, hold up play, and do those things. I think he's going to combine well with Dybala. The one place I will say I'm concerned is goalkeeper right now, and I'll see what Wayne thinks about that. But Rui Patricio, I think, is a bit past it. And if the defense isn't as solid as last year, you might need a goalkeeper who's going to bail you out once in a while. And I don't think Rui's doing that. Last year, his XG, like post shot XG that they track goalkeepers with, was like minus 6.4, which is one of the worst in Serie A. And it hasn't been so great to open the year. So I like the Mercato. It started very slow, but I think Pinto has really done a great job bringing in players to fill needs without spending much money.
Yeah, when you're feeling so constrained with transfer fees, you can only really get these free options. And you got to analyze them. Do they fit because there's only X amount of free players out there, right? Are they going to fit your system too? If they do, then you got to actually convince these guys. And you know what? Most clubs want those free transfers too, especially since there are financial parameters at this time. On top of that, it bothers me in that the keeper situation has continued for a long time. I think I get this FOMO of other big clubs having talent, young talent right now. And I look at Roma, I don't want to crucify them because I understand the way, I understand why, but I would have liked to see a little bit more emphasis in young players. And I don't know if that's being impractical, but I look at some of the guys that come from Inter's youth academy, and they're really talented. Just across Italy, even Atalanta has great scouting. Roma's scouting was like Solbakken, at a guy that they faced, and he did a good job. They got him in. Other than that, it's been these options which are feasible or make economical sense. And I get it. I just feel like Roma could have, I don't know, maybe we could have done the strategy a little bit differently years ago. Like, we shouldn't be in the position we're in now. I do think we should emphasize the young guys a little bit more, and Mourinho is doing that. I'm not saying he's not. I just know that there's so much talent in Rome, and for us to now be in this position where we are confined. Okay, so if we're confined, let's switch things up a little bit. Let's start to play with an emphasis in our academy, and let's make sure that every team plays like this, and we hire a manager who plays like this. Develop an ethos. So for me, I want to see things done a little bit differently. Am I happy with the players that have been brought in? Paredes, yeah, as emergency purchase or whatever loan. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Ndika is good. It's solid. Guy's great one-on-one. He's going to develop. He's young. He's going to have a transfer fee attached to him too when he does leave Roma. So that's great. Plus Valenza. Award, excellent. That's a coup. That's definitely my player of the Mercato thus far. Lukaku, good. It's good. Would I have maybe done things differently in the sense of like, okay, Belotti's doing really good. Let him cook, let him do his thing, keep him confident, and then sign somebody younger? I think so. I know that's not the popular thing. I know that's not what's going to get 5,000 people to the airport, but that's me.
Yeah, and I think when you mentioned the younger players too, we talk about when we move into the guys that departed, because they really only sold Ibanez and Matic unexpectedly, but they had to sell Volpato, they had to sell Tahirovic, they had to sell Misori just to get to that 30 million euro area where they had to get to with the FFP negotiations that they went through with UEFA, where Volpato seems like a pretty talented kid. Tahirovic, for Mourinho to bring him in at 18 years old, and Matic to talk pretty highly of him, he's probably pretty talented, and now he's at Ajax, right? I think Roma's academy produces players. They just don't really get the chance in Rome enough. Even Pellegrini had to go away on loan for 2 years before he really was given a chance in Rome. He had to prove himself elsewhere. You think of some of these other guys that we've used as make weights in the past. Fratesi, right? He was used as make weight for Gregoire de Frel, who ended up going back to Sassuolo, was a bust anyway. I mean, that right there it blows your mind, right? Politano is a guy who came good elsewhere. There's others too that maybe aren't as great, but like a Caprari's like a squad type player.
It's so frustrating because Faticanti is going to be good. Tahirovic is already doing really good for Ajax. I'm like, damn it, man. Yeah, you bring up Fratesi, Politano. It gets under my skin. I got to be honest.
And then you even think about guys that want to come back. Like Fratesi wanted to come back desperately last summer, right? And they didn't make it happen. Scamacca was basically begging to come back this summer. Now he's at Atalanta because they got that Hoyland money. It's frustrating from that regard too.
But if you had all those players together, Steve, and they played for years now, they would have built up such a chemistry. They would have been good, man. That would have been a really good team. And I think that's at the core. I think that's really what I've been trying to say.
Yeah.
So I mean, that leads us. You pretty much answered it for us, but I'll ask it anyway. The situation. Listen, I don't think it's that dissimilar to a lot of clubs in Italy. Italy is a disaster. The league itself is a shell of what it was. So behind the scenes, you mentioned the Friedkins, you mentioned Pinto. These guys came into sort of a mess, right? I think that's something that's fair to say. At least I've heard Steve say it in the past, so I'm going to take it as fact. Not the easiest situation over the past couple of years. You got Mourinho in there who has changed the culture of the locker room. Some of these players I think have probably come to the team because you have a Mourinho there, right? A name like that. Financial fair play is what it is. I don't think any of us fully understand it because it seems to depend on which club you actually are and not how you operate. Give me the overall assessment. I mean, what we're talking about a 6th and 7th place finish the last 2 years since Mourinho's been there, since this ownership group has kind of been in there. What's the outlook? Are you guys happy overall? Are you happy considering, or do you think something needs to happen?
I think they're 5th place. I see Milan looks very strong. Juventus looks awesome. Well, maybe not awesome, but I think they'll figure it out and they will be a strong team. Napoli looks great. Inter are strong. Where does Roma fit in with a Lukaku who's probably past his best years, a decent midfield, an okay defense, and a not good keeper? Is that enough to break that top 4, man? I don't see it. I wouldn't bet on it. If I'm trying to be a neutral, I'm trying to be practical and not like, yeah, Dai Roma. Like, yes, Dai Roma. I love this team. But at the same time, like, I know that the expectations of, I read a lot, top four right now. Why? Like, based off of what? That's what's missing for me, is based off of what.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to health. Dybala's got to stay healthy. Lukaku's got to stay healthy and produce, and Rui's got to be able to react to shots a little bit better, right? I mean, that's scary because even if Roma's scoring goals, if the defense is not as good as it was the past couple seasons, what did they lose in Matic in the center of the midfield? They're protecting that defense that has looked a little shakier this year. I think overall, Nick, in terms of the Friedkins, you have to be fairly happy with what they've done, I think, as a Roma fan, because they've really injected a lot of their own cash into the club to get the finances better. They went big for Mourinho, right? And I think they have to be, congratulated for that because they brought Roma a trophy, nearly a second. Pinto, he gets a lot of heat. He got a lot of heat this summer, but I think in the end, he was working behind the scenes a lot more than Romanisi thought, because in the end, they brought in quite a few players. And I think the squad is upgraded from last season overall in terms of talent and depth. But again, fighting with FFP is tough. And I do think some of those like free agent signings and even like the Lukaku loan signing, I think that has a lot to do with Mourinho's persona, though. And he still has that reputation. He might not be the Mourinho that he was at Real Madrid or Inter's treble, and he might not have that same, I guess, success that he was having at that point. And that's probably why he's at Roma now, right? Because this was kind of like last chance for him in some ways with a bigger club, and he's proving he can still get trophies for clubs. But I do think like Aouar, Ndika, Dybala, Lukaku, like even Sanchez, do these guys come to Roma if Mourinho's not the coach? I don't know. I don't think so, a lot of them.
All right, we'll shift gears into what we expect coming up for this season. Wayne, you kind of touched upon it. Where do we really expect Roma to fall in the context of the league and what the squad is for Roma right now? Where do you realistically see them finishing in Serie A this year, and what do you think their goal should be for this coming campaign?
I think they finished 5th. I think their goal and what they really can achieve is the Europa League championship. I think they can win it. I think this team knows what it takes by Mancini, Smalling. Man, if Sanchez is there, he can really destroy. Hopefully, the bracket is fortuitous and kind to Roma. And if it's halfway decent, I think they can win the whole thing.
I agree. I think that is reasonable. I think they will shoot for top four. They're stating that top four is their goal. Especially, I think that's the signal of intent with Lukaku signing. I think the club desperately needs to get back to Champions League. But like Wayne said, if they do win the Europa League, which I think they're fully capable of after last season, that's also a route to the Champions League. So they don't necessarily have to finish top four to make the Champions League. Could they finish fourth? I think they could if everything goes right and maybe Juve doesn't find its footing as well as it should, or Lazio continues to struggle. Atalanta is up and down at times. I think there is margin of error to finish fourth. I think fifth is more likely based on what we've seen from all these clubs over the past couple seasons, and maybe the injury histories of Dybala and some of these things. I think Napoli, Inter, and Milan though are clearly ahead right now, and I think it could come down to like Juve, Roma, maybe Atalanta, maybe Lazio, maybe even Fiorentina gets in the mix. I think it's going to be a very tight race for fourth, and we'll see if Roma's got enough to do it on both fronts. But Europa League, I think, is also got to be a stated target again after what they did last year.
All right, give us one out on the limb, balls to the wall prediction, player prediction, club. I mean, you told us Europa League, but who's going to be the guy this year?
Oh, the one guy.
The guy.
If it's, I think it is going to be, I want to say Awar, but I think Belotti is going to be the lifeline of it.
Okay.
I like it. I like it. I was sitting here with it at the tip of my tongue. It's hard to project like stats on Awar. I think he's going to be a big impact player for them. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say Belotti scores in the 10 to 15 goal range if he gets enough playing time, depending on how much Lukaku takes off him in terms of playing time.
Well, he already doubled last year's goals, right?
Yeah, I think that midfield is going to really help Belotti. I think he's going to thrive off them. If he just did that against Salernitana, I think that defensive pair, I wouldn't have pegged for that either, because Fazio and Guillaume are actually halfway decent center backs when they can play so low and have a guy like, muscling one another. And the way that Belotti just kind of, I want to say a certain word, but this is a PG show. The way that he manhandled,
you could say
the way that he manhandled Fazio, to me, I was like, yes. And seeing him push it past him like 3 times, it's like, that's my man. So I was happy to see that.
All right. Well, let's wrap up the episode. We're going to play one of our favorite games. It's buy or sell. Wayne, the way this works, I got some statements for you. You can tell me if you're going to buy that statement or if you're going to sell it. We'll start off easy. We'll take a look at Roma's point totals for this season. Do you buy or sell Roma getting over 64.5 points this campaign?
What is that times 3? Or divided by 3?
It'd be about 22
20
wins. 22 wins would get you to
about
66.
22 wins. Oh, God.
So for context, they finished with 63 last season.
I'm buying. Thank you. That is great context, actually.
Yeah, I'm going to buy as well. 70 you needed 70 for Champions League last year, so that just shows they do need a pretty big improvement if things go similar. But I do buy over 64.5. I think they are slightly better this year.
1 point through 2 games. You guys are bold. I like it.
We'll go player focus for our next buy or sell. The man of the hour, Romelu Lukaku, over 14.5 league goals this season. Buy or sell?
So
I'm gonna buy.
Yeah, coach, number one Lukaku fan. All of a sudden, of course he's.
I just think he's gonna be motivated, and as long as he's healthy, I think he scores 15 pairing with Dybala.
All right. Well, speaking of Dybala, he's the focus of our next buy or sell. Nick's favorite buy or sell category. Dybala, over 24.5 games played this season.
Is that Serie A only?
In the league. Sorry.
In the league.
Sure.
sell.
He played 25 last season, so it's right on the cusp there.
Yeah. My lines are good.
I'm going to say I'm going to sell just because I think even if he stays healthy, I think they have more depth that he could be rested a little bit more. I think they're not going to want to risk him as often as they had to last year. At least that's my hope.
And how many games has he played so far this season?
He played 1 because he was suspended for the first.
Okay. It's not a good start. 50%.
And now he's hurt.
And now he's got a minor little thing. Yeah.
Oh, that's how it starts, coach. All right. Maybe we'll go a little more positive on this one. Belotti, over 9.5 league goals, buy or sell?
Bye. He already scored a third of those on against Salernitana.
We already bought that one. I already called 10 to 15 last segment.
Yeah,
All right.
so that's an easy one.
Yeah.
And then we'll close with some buy or sells on our favorite man, Jose Mourinho. Another one of Nick's favorites, going with red cards. Over 2.5 red cards for Jose Mourinho this season.
I think it's a buy, probably, right, Wayne?
That's a buy. That's surely a buy.
I lowered my
Judging
number.
by the refereeing this last week, that refereeing for sure. If they're going to be doing that to Juventus, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen to Roma.
Yeah, I was initially going to set that line a little bit higher, but then I realized he's already missed a couple games for Roma. He's already suspended in Europe. I was like, oh, maybe he'll calm down a little bit. Maybe he's learned his lesson, but I think this isn't over.
We'll close it with this one is mine. I've often made the joke that Mourinho is a 3-year manager. Wheels start to fall off in season 3. This is season 3 for Roma. So do you buy or sell Mourinho still being the head coach for Roma come June 1st of next year?
I think he wins the Europa League and he's out.
Oh, a positive exit for Mourinho. Okay.
Yeah.
It's hard because his contract's up at the end of the year and he hasn't renewed yet. I think the only way he's back next year potentially is if they make Champions League and another big squad doesn't come calling. That might intrigue him, like a Madrid or someone like that, and maybe he
Saudi.
sticks around. Yeah,
$50 million a year to coach in the Saudi League. I think that's on the table.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Wayne, that'll wrap up the episode. Listen, tried to give you the best introduction I possibly could, but we want to thank you so damn much for coming on. Please let the viewers, the listeners know what you're up to these days, where they can find you. Plug away.
My pleasure, man. I'm trying to make it. I'm trying to live the dream. I want to be out there reporting at Roma Club New York, Roma Club DC, whatever it is. That's one thing for this year. I'm really trying to focus on. In the past, I've written for or done editorial stuff for Roma on IFTV and video, but now I think I more than anything just want to, get fans' stories out there and broadcast from places and keep it going and just make something fun that people Roma fans in particular can unite around, and see where it gets me. And if nothing more, at least I could do something for what it means to be a fan of Italian football in whatever small way. So that's kind of like, I've had a lot of, how to say, like, not eye-opening, but really trying to put things into perspective in the past year or so of my life. I think, what is this all for? And that's one thing I just want to, I try to think, what am I decent at, man? I was at the beach yesterday, not to get philosophical, but trying to think, like, what do I know how to do? And I was like, I kind of know how to cook and be a parent and talk about football. And I was like, so that's what I'll do. And I'll just try to be the best at it or give it my best. That's the goal now. Keep on Twittering, keep on YouTubing.
Really appreciate you coming on, dude. And Steve, we give Steve a lot of shit, but he knows his shit, but he's a little bit more of the homer when it comes to Roma. I appreciate your even keeled, logical perspective on the team. Definitely
Thank you.
Great episode for
Thank
sure.
you. Thanks, guys.